Thanks, Sheila. All right, keep that open because it'll be helpful to have it there as we follow along this afternoon. You can never have too many Bibles, but I might just remove two-thirds of those, put them down there. It is a beautiful thing, isn't it, when you do something that you feel like you're made to do. When you do something you think, it just brings me joy because of what I'm doing. I read this quote during yesterday, actually. It was from an astronomer, the first American woman to work as a professional astronomer, Maria Mitchell. She said, "I was born to be an astronomer. I was called to it by the structure of my mind. The study of nature is for me a constant source of pure joy." Right? When you know what you're made to do and you're doing it, it is a joyful thing. Now, this book we're looking at a little portion of today, 1 Peter, is a book all about how to live as Christians in a culture that's pretty different. How to live when, you feel a bit out of place. When you're experiencing maybe what we could call today kind of a low-level sort of suffering. It's not being put in prison, perhaps, for us, but maybe you're losing a job or some friends. Maybe you're losing face with people that you know when it's a little bit difficult. And when you're feeling out of place, when things are difficult, then what you really want to know is that what you're doing is what you should be doing, that there's some purpose to what's going on. And this section of 1 Peter, it tells us that we are actually supposed to be strangers. Right? We are supposed to be strange. I have met a few Christians in my life and all of them are strange. Right? But that is a good thing. That is a good thing. Because that gives us the unique ability to do what we were made to do, right? To reflect God to the world. So, in this passage today, there's sort of 3 descriptions of God's people. So verses 4 to 5, and then skip over a couple, you've got verses 9 to 10 and verses 11 to 12. And in those middle verses I skipped over there, 6, 7 and 8, it's all about Jesus, fittingly kind of sandwiched in the middle. And so each of these little sections tells us something both about who we are, our identity, and what we should be doing, our purpose. So we're going to kind of go through the sections twice. Once we're going to look at who we are, then we're going to look at why we are, and in between we're going to talk about Jesus. Okay, so that's the plan. That's the plan. So first, who we are. Have a look at verses 4 and 5, the first little part. You can see we are like living stones being built into a spiritual house. Right now, the house this is talking about is the temple, and the temple is the place to meet God. In the Old Testament, God met his people in a physical place. Come the New Testament, though, Jesus describes himself as the temple, God in the flesh, the place you go to meet God, see Jesus, see God. And here in 1 Peter, it's the people of God who are described as his temple. Right? God doesn't have a particular holy place in Jerusalem anymore. There is no particular holy place even on the North Tyneside coast. No. God meets people as he operates in his world through his people, the church, the Christian community. Okay, so that's the first thing that we are. God's people are also a holy priesthood. Now, the role of the priest was to be the mediator, the connection between God and people. And now we are all described as priests. There's not particular people to do it on our behalf anymore. What it means to be a Christian, to be part of the people of God, is to have an amazing direct connection, access to God himself. Okay, so that's 2 amazing things from that first little section. Come down to the second little part. We are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession. It's verse 9. These are descriptions that go all the way back to Israel, God's people in the Old Testament. That's what they were called, but they didn't do a very good job of that. Now he chooses us, people following Jesus from every nation, to be a new Israel, a new people of God. Okay, so there's our next thing that we are. Now jump down to the third part. Have a look at verse 11. This third little part describes God's people in relation to the world. So it says, we're aliens and strangers in the world. And it kind of makes sense when you think about who we've just been described as, a temple of God, God's special people. Of course, we're going to be different to those who aren't those things. Of course, we'll feel like foreigners. Okay, so that's quickly who we are, right? A temple where people meet God. Priests able to approach God directly and freely. God's precious people and feeling a bit strange in the world. What a description. Okay, so now let's move to those middle couple of verses. The basis of our identity is Jesus. So have a look. He's described in verse 4. Just have a look at verse 4 quickly first. He's described as the living stone. He's the foundation. And then we see in verse 6 that he's the chosen and precious cornerstone, right? So similar idea. This is in the quotation there that comes from Isaiah 28. So Jesus is the cornerstone. He's the foundation of this spiritual house of the church. And those who believe in him recognize that, as you see in verse 7. Yeah, as you know, not everyone sees him that way. That's always been the plan, though. Peter points this out with his next Old Testament quotation. He quotes from Psalm 118. The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. Right, so the leaders and the people of the first century, they, of course, rejected Jesus, which led in God's sovereignty to his death for the sins of the world. It's always been the plan. People still today reject Jesus. But that doesn't mean something's gone wrong. That's pretty comforting to think about when you begin, to doubt perhaps when people that you know or people that you kind of read, mock Jesus. That's okay. It's always been the way. So I wonder, if Jesus is the cornerstone, if he is the foundation, are we basing our lives on him? Right? It's interesting. Being God's people isn't about attending church. Right? It's not about turning up each week. That's part of it. But the foundation is Jesus. It's about being founded on him. It's about believing in him. Verse 7. It's possible to be here in this church. It's possible to have been here for years. It's possible to go to church somewhere else and not be one of God's people. And not have your life founded on Jesus. So is your life founded on him? Are you trying to trust him more each day? All right, let's return now looking through the passage again with a different lens. Okay, so sorry for this slightly complicated structure, but I think it's useful. We're going to look through the passage again, and now we're going to look at why we're here, our purpose, which is based on who we are, our identity. So have a look, pardon me, at the top again at part 1. In the first part, in verse 5, we're to offer spiritual sacrifices to God. Right, the picture of the temple and the priests kind of continues. It's clear that these sacrifices are not bulls or goats or any kind of animals. They're spiritual sacrifices. And so we're given more detail about this in that second part. So have a look down at verse 9, where we are a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his glorious light. Right? This is why God sets people apart, to proclaim his greatness to the world. This is the purpose. Right? This has been God's plan for the whole time, to choose a particular people to bring blessing out to the whole world. That was the plan. It was Adam and Eve. And then that's what God said to Abraham in Genesis. Then again, when he saved his people, Israel, from Egypt, he made them a kingdom of priests, people who were supposed to kind of mediate between God and the world, be the connection, bringing praise to God and declaring God's praises to everyone else. Jesus himself picks up on this same theme in some of his teaching. For instance, he says the famous line, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. That's what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5. And here, Peter's saying that we are to be a royal priesthood, right? Mediators between God and the world, declaring the praises of God to the world. So this mission, doing that, is like, it flows out of the identity of God's people. It's not sort of an add-on, it's central. And so in the third little section there, have a look at verse 12 now. We are to live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day that he visits us. Right? It's a bit hard to know if that's talking about a final day when God wraps history up, Jesus returns, or whether it's talking about when someone meets God as they die within history. But either way, the point is that God is supposed to be glorified because of what Christians do. And so in those moments that we feel kind of different, right, at work or at school perhaps, or in our families, amongst our friends, when we feel like strangers, we want to remember we're strangers so that people glorify God. That's sort of how it's been set up. And so when we kind of avoid that, when we want to be a little less strange, we want to avoid maybe a bit of suffering because of that, that not only doesn't really make sense in terms of who we are, but actually it just sort of cuts off the exact purpose we're made for. And so I just want to finish by just looking at these kind of two, I guess, protective mechanisms I think we might use sometimes to avoid this. The first one is kind of accepting our surrounding culture, and so becoming like those around us and not distinct. That's the first thing. Or the second thing is kind of avoiding being part of the world, part of the culture completely. Right? So the first thing we might do to protect ourselves is to just accept the surrounding culture, become a little less strange. Now, you can see how this is not really possible in the way Peter looks at things. He says in verse 11 there, he says, abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul. And he's saying it's not right. It's sinful to just act on your desires to fit in or to do whatever else is happening in the culture. Because if we're the same as everyone else, it makes no sense of our identity as God's people, and it makes no sense in terms of our role to be priests. So what might that look like? Accepting perhaps the culture might look like, maybe changing the way you speak, changing your language in a way that actually you're not actually that comfortable with. It could look like compromising on honesty after there's pressure from someone at school or at work or someone else. It could look like spending more than actually what you think is right to spend on clothes or gadgets or something else in order to fit in. I think we often make ourselves feel better about doing that particular thing by, it's clever, I do this, you do the same thing but just a little bit less, right? So for instance, we might say, okay, I don't know, big purchase, say we're going to buy a new car, okay, but I'm just going to buy one that's not quite as good as the person across the road, and that way I can trick myself into thinking that actually I'm different. But actually, no, underneath, we're trying to find our value in perhaps what we own or what people think of us, right? A sinful desire. Right? Instead of accepting the culture around us, we should abstain from sinful desires. Okay, so that's the first one. And then the second one, the other sort of way we might try to protect ourselves is to avoid the culture around us. Peter, however, says, live good lives among the pagans. Right? You've got to be among people to live good lives that they can see. We can't declare God's praise to the world if we have no interaction with the world. Now, in history, different groups have taken this different ways. For us, it might not be as extreme as, say, say, like the Amish people who've really decided to live away from everyone else without the influence of technology. That's kind of one approach, but it might not look like that for us. It might mean, though, for us, filling our lives with lots of Christian things, so much so that we're not engaging with other people at all. Maybe most of our friends are Christians, and there's not many who aren't. Or perhaps it means finding yourself in a conversation that turns to something that's maybe a bit scary, but also meaningful. So something, I don't know, maybe something about sexuality or something like that. And then rather than kind of going in and embracing that discussion, you retreat and avoid what's going on. You retreat back into the safety of superficiality. Now, these things, they're not wrong, in themselves, but, if you're avoiding the world all the time, you're shirking your whole task of bringing glory to God by representing Him in that moment. So instead of avoiding the surrounding culture, we should live among those around us. So when you're feeling like a stranger, and I hate to tell you, you are strange. That's who you are as a Christian. When you're feeling as if you don't fit in, remember, you don't. That's the point. So I've got two things just to leave you with as a wrap up. The first thing is this week, whatever you do, remember why you're here. You are one of God's people. You're declaring God's praises to the world in a way that other people who aren't God's people can't do. Remember why you're here. And second, well, right now, this afternoon, as you look around, I don't know who you were expecting to see at church this afternoon. I was expecting to see Luke Parker. He's not here. But look around. We are in a meeting of God's people where God dwells. Like royal priests. Those are the people who are sitting beside you, who can approach God as priests. That's who we are. That's the significance of this gathering. So if your foundation, if your cornerstone is Jesus, then we're being built into a spiritual house. Isn't that magnificent? Remember who you are. Now let's spend a moment praying. Our Father, thank you so much for what you have done for us in Jesus, in the cornerstone, that He is the foundation for a building that brings praise to you. We thank you that though He was stumbled over, that He was rejected, that was part of your plan in order for Him to bring people to you. We just pray that we would appreciate that, what you've done for us, appreciate our amazing privileged position before you, and pray that you would help us live out of that reality this week. In Jesus' name, amen. Well,